everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Freedom Journey. And today we're going to talk about Romans 8:28. And it's everybody knows it. And we know all things work together for good to them that love God.
Yeah.
To them who are called according to his purpose. And in Christianity, where we're taught that it meant if we love God, all things would work out for good. And I don't know if we actually said it, but we certainly meant it. We insinuated that if you didn't love God, well, tough luck. Things probably won't work out so well, and you'll end up suffering in hell forever. So I don't know. That's what I grew up with.
Yeah.
And, but like many scriptures, this one suffers from some mistranslation issues.
Yes.
And like many of those, it misrepresents the goodness and love of God.
Yes.
And so today, can you explain to us, when looking at the original Greek, what this passage is really saying?
Yeah. Oh, I'd be glad to. And certainly my religious past mirrors yours. This is just it was probably a big day when we realized this verse the first time and realized that that things are working together for good. And that's exciting. But then it was imposed upon us by the translation itself, as well as by people using the translation, that there was some kind of condition there, that we had to be loving God. And then, of course, that once religion works that in, then the floodgate opens, because how much do you love God? And do you love, is your quality of love good enough to merit everything working right? And it, of course, introduces this whole idea that if you love God, things are gonna go good. You might be a little bumpy here and there, but it's all working out, And the more we learn about the truth, the scriptures say it rains on the just and the unjust. When the hurricane comes, it comes, for the saints and the sinners, and we begin to realize, what does this verse mean? And for me in my own journey, as time went along, I began to see and understand the sovereignty of God and to embrace his absolute sovereignty. And not that he's writing our story as it goes along, so that God is watching to see if we're going to love him, and then he's going to write all this good stuff that's going to eventuate in good stuff anyway. But I began to realize and grasp that the truth of the scriptures was that God is sovereign, absolutely sovereign, and that he has already written our lives. And then added to that, to the sovereignty of God, is the fatherhood of God and the love of God. That God doesn't just have an attribute of love, but that love is the core and essence of who he is. And that God is love. So that even love as we know it in any dimension is really a small taste and expression of God himself. And then we realize, so we're adding all these pieces. God on our journey, and I know you share this journey with me, Steve, and probably most of our listeners do. That we come to embrace the absolute sovereignty of God. We come to embrace the absolute love of God as his character and nature. And then we come to embrace, based on those two, God opens our eyes to the principle that God is going to restore everything and everyone, and to beautiful perfection and harmony with himself and harmony with the rest of creation, something we term the salvation of all or universal reconciliation or whatever we want to term that. But this grand conclusion where God's going to be all in all. And he can't be all in all if there's annihilation. He can't be all in all um, if there's eternal conscious torment. Everything has to be restored. Um, as we've learned, behold, I make all things new. Not new things, but all things new. How beautiful a truth is that. And then we come, as we collect these great truths, and that's the relative standpoint from our study. But the absolute standpoint, as we come into this realization of these glorious foundational truths, and then we come back to Romans 8:28, and I'll just read it to you from the King James Version, where you and I probably would have grown up hearing it. For we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. And then again enters the problem. It's going to all turn out great if you love God and you've been called. Oh boy, have I been called? Oh boy, do I love God? Do I even know what that means, love? And then there's just all this weight on us. And what this verse does, which, you're pointing out the problem just in asking the question, is what this verse ends up doing is it casts doubt on the sovereignty of God. It casts doubt on the love of God. It casts doubt on God being all in all. It casts doubt on whether we love God enough or whether we're called, and, places great human responsibility in this verse. And then we have to say to ourselves, and I can't tell you I exactly know the progression of how I came to understand the truth of this verse, but I know it had to do with somewhere along the way I said, okay, something's wrong with this verse as it's translated. And then I began to try to seek an understanding of the literal translation of the passage. And the first thing that I noticed about this, which the concordant version, I would imagine first alerted me to the problem. And that is, this verse starts off by saying, and we know that all things work together. All things work together. This is almost a humanistic or lack of faith. You hear people say this kind of thing. Everything's working out. Everything's working, and when in fact, the concordant version says that God is working all things together for good. Not that they're working together for good. All things are working. God's the one working. It's not the idea, well, it's going to all work out. No, there's a master planner in it. So there's where the sovereignty of God is. Not that things are just going to naturally work out. You send out enough good vibes and you send out enough good things and karma, and it's just going to come back to you and all this stuff. And so it's not that the things are working, as the King James would say. The things are working. No, it's God working. God is the instrument of work. He's the divine energy. He's the one accomplishing it. And the question is he only accomplishing it for us? And I'll have to say, I put this verse on the back burner for a long time. And I remember the first time I got a letter here that I'll bring up. I remember the first time that a solution was brought to my attention and mind. And I received a letter from the late Peter Fedema from Canada. And he had corresponded with me about this and about the true meaning of Romans 8:28. And and I'll just read you what he said. And then this really set me on the right course. He said, concerning Romans 8:28, Dean Huff, of Concordant Publishing concern, quite a few years ago when he was speaking at our Kitchener Concordant Conference, explained that he was kind of surprised by the way that Knock had rendered Romans 8:28, even in the Concordant version. And that Dean had said, according to the Greek grammar, now I say we, you and me, we're not Greek experts, so I don't even have a lot of working knowledge of Greek grammar, so when it comes to Greek grammar, then I have to rely on people who do have some working knowledge. Now, the problem there is there will be people on both sides of any issues with Greek knowledge who will explain something different to us. But what we always do, what the believer should always do, is consult the scriptures to see if the scriptures themselves teach or confirm what any dictionary says or what any Greek grammar expert says. But anyway, so Dean had suggested that according to Greek grammar, Romans 8:28, reading what Fatima had written to me, that Dean Huff had said that the Greek grammar of Romans 8:28 tells us that those who love God are to be aware that God is working together all for good. So that there's a structure in the Greek grammar that's not being adequately conveyed in the English. Now, we're not surprised by this. I found so many examples in my study of scriptures that translators have hidden the goodness of God. They've hidden the love of God. They've hidden the success of God. We've talked about some of them before. Like God is the blessed God instead of the happy God. Because somehow God being happy disrupts the theology of the translators. We can't have God being happy. He's an angry God. And the same thing here. We can't have God being good to everybody. For goodness sakes, that just won't add up. And it certainly doesn't match religion, because religion needs to keep you in bondage. And if they can keep you concerned that how things ultimately turn out depend on your action, love, and your calling, and this all somehow depends on you, then they got you right where they want you, to manipulate you and control you. So Dean Huff suggests that the Greek grammar is saying that those of us who are aware that God is working all together for good, those of us who love God, when we see his love and know him personally from the truth of the scriptures, that we have this awareness that this is going on. So anyway, he suggested, Fatima did in his article, that we go back and look at some of the writings of Dean Huff where he discusses Romans 8:28. And I'll just read you a couple places where he does this. For instance, in volume 87 of The Unsearchable Riches, he says this: God does not do anything without a reason. God is operating all in accord with the counsel of his will, Ephesians 1:11, and it is for good, Romans 8:28. So he references Romans 8:28 as the good for all of God's operation instead of just for a certain group of people. Then in volume 90 of The Unsearchable Riches, he says this, and citing Romans 8:28 says this: For us who are called, there is an awareness that God is working all together for good. This, and then he cites Romans 8:28. He says, this is why we claim that in creating the heavens and earth, God was beginning a good work that will ultimately bring him glory in every aspect, in everyone, everywhere, always. Beautiful. And that's what we know the truth to be from the consensus of the whole scriptures. This is the truth. And he translates it in that passage to convey that. In the same volume, a few issues later, he writes this: For we who are aware, it is clear to us who are loving God that God is working all together for good. Romans 8:28. And then finally, and by the way, here's an article that we republished in BSN 997. Maybe we'll put the link in the show notes. But in BSN 997, we have an article that we ran called "We Are Aware," and it's from the Unsearchable Riches, volume 96. And I'll just read a little portion of it because I think this is beautiful. So Dean Huff says, in believing the evangel, the believer becomes aware of God in a way that is hidden from those who do not believe. Paul writes in Romans 8:28, now we are aware that God is working together, all for good. And then the next words might well be rendered as follows. And so he translates it for us. This awareness is for those who are loving God and who are called. This awareness belongs to us. No one else is aware. They might wish this were true. They might fancy it, hopeful that it's true. But those of us who are called and love God as a response to his love to us, we know this to be true. Now, again, reading from Dean Huff in Unsearchable Riches 96. The Greek does not literally say of those who are loving God, but to and for those who are loving God. God is working all together for good, but most people are just not aware of this fact. Yet, if we are believing the evangel, we are becoming aware of this sure and certain aspect of God's character and pattern of operation. He is working all together for good. As believers, we are aware of this. This is what God tells us in the evangel that we're believing. We are told that God has a purpose and that we are called into a special calling in accord with that purpose. And this purpose involves all that happens and all that exists. This purpose is the purpose of God who is operating all in the counsel of his will. And I'll tell you what, when I saw that, and someone who has Dean Huff, one of the translators of the Concordant and the revisers of the Concordant version. In fact, the Concordant version has been in the last few years being under revision again. There are numerous revisions of the Concordant version. In fact, the current translation that's printed that we have copies of is the 6th edition. And what does this speak to? It speaks to the fallibility of man, right? And we continue to learn, and we continue not only in the truths that we teach, but in the way we understand the scriptures to be translated. And so, in the last few years, last 10 years or so, the concordance continually to be revised. And in the Unsearchable Riches magazine, as they revise it, they're publishing it there. And so, in 2016, the revision of this verse says, Romans 8:28. Now we are aware that to those who are loving God, God is working all together for good to those who are called according to the purpose. Now, the interesting thing is there, if we read even this revision, that undoubtedly, I communicated with Dean Huff a few times about my concerns about the way this was translated, and it was interesting that he also expressed his surprise that Knock, oversaw a mistranslation of that verse. But if we remove from this verse all the words that are added by the translators to help us understand it, this verse actually just says, just reading the Greek translation of only the Greek words. Now, aware that loving God is working together, all together for good, are called according to the purpose. So we know that any translation from one language to another, there are certain dynamics of that language, the way things are understood and structured, that have to be adapted to the language that it's received in. And so in the Bible Students version, so we have it translated this way, based on what we have understood from Dean Huff and his understanding of Greek grammar and our understanding of the scriptures themselves. So we in the Bible Students version, Romans 8:28, we have it translated this way: for us who love God, who are the called according to his purpose, there is an awareness that he is working all together for good. We're the people on the planet. We know the absolute sovereignty of God. We know the absolute love of God. We know that the absolute fatherhood of God. Paul's the one who says that he's the God and Father of all, not just some. And that he's going to be all in all. And when we know this about God, we're really the only people on the planet who know who knows and understands the big picture. We know where everything's going. We know everything's just as it should be, and everything's working out. Not everything's working out. God's working everything out from start to finish, from A to Z. He's not adjusting. He's not coming up with extra plans. He's not adapting. He's fulfilling the logos that he began with. And before he began operation, as a wise, all-knowing, all-sovereign God, he's already designed the end from the beginning. So there's the glorious truth of Romans 8:28.
Well, Clyde, I know about 10 Greek words. Aeon and Sheol, those.
Yeah.
But knowing God and realizing God, I completely agree. I don't know for me, I don't even know. I'm glad people studied it out.
Yeah.
And there are people called to do that. But for me, it's like, well, of course that's true.
Of course it is. Yes. Yeah. It immediately resonates, right?
Exactly.
Now we're glad someone who's, like you said, someone who's got the knowledge of Greek and grammar, they can say, yeah, okay, this matches what we understand. But it immediately, when we read it this way, it immediately resonates. We say, yes, that's it.